What if Geto had never turned evil? To understand the weight of that change, we need to go back to the summer of 2006. In the original story, Suguru Geto lost himself in the sound of the frenzied applause of ordinary humans, while the lifeless body of Riku Amanai rested in Gojo's arms. There, the seed of hatred was planted, but what if it had been different? What if that seed of hatred fell to the ground? Look, Suguru Geto and Satoru Gojo are undeniably the strongest duo in Jujutsu Kaisen, and if this duo stayed together, not even Sukuna could stop them. In this version, while Suguru gets into the bath, tasting the bitterness of vomit-stained rags or swallowing the core of a curse, he is not alone in his mind. And Raibara, the freshman who, in the original story, would die tragically against a local deity, enters the room with his energy, contagious energy. In this reality, Raibara not only survived that critical mission thanks to strategic and quick support sent by Geto, but also became the emotional anchor Suguru needed to keep from sinking at that moment. Instead of isolating himself in a monologue of contempt for the monkeys, Geto shares the burden of endless exorcism with someone who still sees beauty in the world of sorcerers. This mental stability creates a butterfly effect, shattering the timeline we know. With Suguru by his side, Satoru Gojo doesn't become the only strongest, they remain as we are the strongest. This means that Geto's evolution doesn't stagnate at the level of a cult leader, but rises to gigantic heights. By maintaining his connection with Jujutsu School, Suguru develops a forbidden synergy technique, which mixes curse control with the refinement of reserved energy, which he learned by observing Satoru. The final technique he begins to sketch at this time is called Blood Nirvana. Creates such an absurd power gap that even Gojo's limitless technique finds its limit. But the true nature of this ability is a crucial detail, which will only be explained when we reach the climax of Shibuya, where reality will be bent. In terms of power scale, a mentally focused Suguru Geto becomes a combat monster. If in the story he already possesses formidable physical strength, his reaction speed reaches hypersonic levels, comparable to the feats of characters who dodge bullets and stop objects weighing tons. The changes in the canon really start happening in the year 2017. In the original storyline, Suguru would attack Shijuku and Kyoto during the night parade of 100 demons and would die at the hands of Gojo. Here, that event never happens. Instead, Suguru Geto is the main mentor of Yutokotsu. When Yuta enters the school with Rika's curse, Geto doesn't see prey to steal, but rather a mirror of his own potential. He teaches Yuta not only to accept Rika, but to master the manipulation of cursed energy, with a precision that Gojo, with his 6 eyes, sometimes has trouble explaining because it's too instinctive. The result is a Yuta Okotsu who reaches a special grade level in just a few years under the joint tutelage of 2 pillars of the modern era. But while the light of heroes shines, the shadows move. Kenjaku, the ancient entity, sees his 1,000-year plan reduced to ashes. Without Suguru Geto's body available to possess, he needs to improvise, and his frustration leads him to a desperate decision that will completely change the fate of Yuji Itadori. However, we'll see that later. Now, this is where most people get it wrong when imagining the top of the world. Jujutsu many believe that Satoru Gojo would always be the solitary pinnacle. However, in this timeline, the distance between the two simply disappears. With Geto acting as the moral and strategic pillar of Jujutsu School, the teaching dynamic changes completely. Forget the isolated and chaotic training. Now each student has the support of a master who understands the biology of curses. No one. When Itadori eats Sukuna's finger, the reaction is not immediate execution, but rather an unprecedented scientific and spiritual containment. Geto uses his manipulation of curses to create an internal surveillance network inside Yuji, using minor curses to monitor the flow of Sukuna's energy in real time. The presence of a kind Geto creates an environment where strength is not just brute force, but synergistic. Imagine the impact of this on Megumi Fushiguro's training. Instead of struggling to understand his shadows alone, he has Suguru, who possesses millennia of knowledge accumulated through the curses he consumed, teaching him to merge the intent of his summons with the environment. The scale of power here is absurd. While Gojo manipulates space-time at the atomic level, Geto becomes the master of ecology. Cursed with this immense power, the game changes for the sorcerers, Jujutsu. But do you think he actually gained all that power? By procrastinating, he organized a training routine, having discipline and focus around his goal. Now, realize that this stability creates a colossal problem for the villains. Kenjaku, the millennial brain, is in absolute panic. The original plan to seal Gojo in Shibuya depended entirely on Satoru's emotional shock upon seeing the face of his deceased best friend. Without Suguru's body to inhabit, Kenjaku is forced to use a much less efficient vessel and to act desperately. Since the Jujutsu school is too strong, the natural disasters and special grade curses like Mahito and Jogo decide to move ahead with their plans. They no longer seek a new era of curses, not through slow chaos, but rather through a full-scale terrorist attack on the school's headquarters, something that never happened in the original work. Instead of just Hanami attacking alongside evil sorcerers who help create a barrier against the students, several special grade curses are present. But you see, with Suguru present, in addition to Gojo, everyone's safety was still maintained. With Geto present, the changes from here on will be huge, especially for our protagonist's mental stability. However, don't celebrate just yet. Mahito still survives, and worse, he finally awakens. Understanding how Geto now deals with Mahito's awakening is crucial, because what comes next in Shibuya will prove it. Even with the two strongest on the battlefield, the cost of victory might be something that neither of them is willing to lose. If you think victory is guaranteed just because Geto is good, you have no idea what Kenjaku has prepared. In the original story, Kenjaku relied on the emotional shock Satoru Gojo felt when he saw the face of his deceased best friend to seal him in the prison. However, in this timeline, when the Shibuya incident begins and Satoru enters Shibuya Station, he is not alone or vulnerable. Suguru Geto is clearing the perimeter with frightening efficiency, moving at hypersonic speed, able to dodge projectiles and coordinate simultaneous attacks on multiple floors. Thanks to his mastery of the sea, the presence of the real Suguru alongside Satoru makes the sealing plan useless. However, Kenjaku had to take other measures against Gojo. In a desperate act, he focuses his entire plan this time around Itadori. You will see how this will impact the story from now on. Since Kenjaku is clever, he would never face Gojo head-on to the point of being exorcised. Soon, the special grade curses arrive to save him, or at least try to. Kenjaku escapes to carry out his plan, using Itadori as his trump card. And notice that during the climax of the battle against the special grade curses, we see a display of strength that puts the strongest duo on a divine level. While Satoru Gojo uses the infinite void to paralyze the enemy's nervous systems, Suguru Geto unleashes a barrage of cursed energy that pulverizes Mahito and finishes them off before they can even understand what happened. Look, with Geto's presence in Shibuya, the deaths of important sorcerers would never have happened, like the leader of the Zenin clan, Nanami, and the near death of Nobara, and I know you must be wondering if he would meet Toji. The answer is no, because at this moment, he would be fighting against the other special grade curses. However, in the midst of the chaos, Kenjaku had prepared something to make Itadori consume all of Sukuna's fingers, forcing him to awaken the king of curses within himself. And how would he do that? Well, Kenjaku acts from the shadows, always watching. Soon he would be around Itadori, knowing his limits and weaknesses, taking hostages into his possession. Itadori would be forced to meet Kenjaku's demands, thinking he could contain Sukuna. However, with all his fingers, Sukuna manages to awaken inside Itadori for a few crucial moments. Remember that Suguru had implemented micro-curse monitoring to contain the King of Curses. Upon detecting Sukuna's strength growing inside Itadori's body, he and Satoru appear to stop Kenjaku from releasing Sukuna. But it would be too late, and the craziest battle begins. The effort to keep Shibuya intact while facing Kenjaku and Sukuna at the same time becomes practically impossible. This time in Shibuya, Sukuna is at full power. However, he would be much stronger if he had Megumi's body, with the 10 Shadows technique and Mahoraga by his side. And speaking of him, what would happen to Shibuya while Geto and Gojo are busy with Sukuna and Kenjaku? Look, with the training from someone who understands how to control curses and is much more methodical than Satoru, like we mentioned before, Megumi would be much stronger than what we know. So, there would be no need to summon Mahoraga. So the biggest threat up to that point would still be Kenjaku and Sukuna. Kenjaku tries to coordinate a flood of curses and ancient techniques against Geto, but the sorcerer's mastery at this point is insane. While Gojo deals with Sukuna's hypersonic speed, exchanging blows that distort space-time, Geto advances like a living fortress, unleashing the strongest curses from his arsenal. With Kenjaku's defeat and exorcism, Geto was finally able to support Gojo, who was holding back to minimize the damage in Shibuya. Even though Sukuna summoned the Malevolent Shrine and competed with Gojo's domain expansion at every moment, at a certain point, Sukuna became unable to use her domain due to severe brain damage caused by the effect of the Infinite Void and the repeated effort to heal her curse technique with the reverse technique. This strain fried the area of the brain responsible for domain expansion. This allows Suguru to open his domain expansion called Blood Nirvana. And look, this technique is not just an ordinary domain expansion, but a forbidden synergy that allows Suguru. Geto converts the accumulated suffering of all the curses he has ever consumed into pure conceptual energy. When activating the Blood Nirvana, Geto creates a field where causality is distorted. He not only attacks the physical body, but devours the very concept of the enemy's existence, preventing any form of regeneration. No matter how instantaneous it is, not even Gojo's limitless technique can touch this essence. Because the Blood Nirvana operates on a soul frequency that ignores the laws of physical space. This technique allows Suguru to focus all his damage solely on Sukuna's soul and energy, making it possible to save his student's soul. Instead of just anchoring his domain, Yuji Geto uses the technique as a conceptual grinder, isolating the soul from the river of curses to be processed as the final curse. Sukuna is crushed by the engine of accumulated suffering, having his existence and even the very concept of his soul devoured down to the cellular level. The course of this powerful technique is the permanent sacrifice of more than 1,000 curses from his army to incinerate Sukuna's essence. Once and for all, erasing him from history. The victory in Shibuya is absolute, but the Jujutsu world will never be the same. The era of curses begins to fade away. Satoru and Suguru reform the system of the three great families, eliminating the elders' corruption and creating a future where no sorcerer has to die alone. And look, our protagonist wasn't traumatized this time, being able to live a happy life alongside his mentors and friends. If you enjoyed this story, then you need to see what would happen in this story here, which I picked out for you. I'm sure you're going to like it. But don't leave the video without first leaving a like, subscribing to the channel, and commenting. What's the next crazy theory you want to see on this channel? I'll see you there, otaku.